Good evening to everybody, and welcome back to the show. Welcome back to the part two of Tea Time. Now, this is for our English speaker. We're gonna go through a story about a mother that kicked out her daughter because she was pregnant, and all this happened during Christmas time. So we are going to listen, and will let us know what you think.
Stared straight at me, her eyes cold as ice, and said every word with brutal clarity, "You and the baby inside you are dead to me. You are no longer part of this family." Hearing those words felt like a door slamming shut behind me, sealing off everything I once believed to be family. Welcome to Family Ashes, where family secrets burn down to ashes. And let me ask you this, if your own parents rejected you at the very moment you were carrying a child, would you sit in silence and let the pain consume you, or would you stand up and fight back in your own way? Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts, because this story, trust me, will leave you shaken. My name is Rachel Morgan, I'm 29 years old, and I work as a nurse at the University of Chicago Medical Center. The job is demanding, exhausting at times, but it gives me a clear sense of purpose, the knowledge that I am saving lives every single day. Outside the hospital, my life is tied to Adrian Torres, my husband, a man whose profession might make some people raise their eyebrows. Adrian owns a small tattoo shop in Chicago. He's Mexican-American, hardworking, and pours all of his talent into every line of ink on his client's skin. Many see his work as rebellion, but I see a true artist, a man whose hands can transform someone's story into a living image, and whose heart knows how to love without conditions. My mother, Victoria Morgan, was born and raised in privilege. Her family built its fortune from a chain of hotels starting in the 1950s, so she never had to worry about money. Instead, she spent her life maintaining the image of a perfect socialite, hosting charity galas, playing tennis at exclusive clubs, and making sure the Morgan name was always present at Chicago's elite events. To her, family reputation meant everything, so much so that I often felt motherhood itself was just another role she performed for appearances. My father, Charles Morgan, was the opposite. A retired lawyer, he chose a quiet life, avoiding conflict whenever possible. At family dinners, when my mother's words turned sharp and cut into me, he would simply open his newspaper, pretending to be absorbed in the headlines, as if he hadn't heard a thing. He never contradicted her, but he never defended me either. That silence often weighed heavier than her criticisms. It made me realize that in this family, I would always have to fight alone. And then there was Ethan, my younger brother, 26 years old and not a day truly grown. He was unemployed, living off our parents, and seemed to have mastered only one skill, dodging responsibility. Ethan could spend entire days in the basement, gaming and ordering takeout, and no one ever said a word. To my mother, he was always the poor boy who needed extra support. To me, he was the glaring reminder of unfairness. Every time I worked twice as hard to earn even a shred of approval, Ethan only had to exist to be adored. That favoritism was no longer an unspoken truth, it was blatant reality, and I knew I would never be able to claim the title of perfect child in my mother's eyes. I met Adrian during what seemed like a normal night shift. He was brought into the ER after a motorcycle accident, his clothes torn and his skin scraped badly enough to make anyone cringe. I had prepared myself for a patient who would be irritable or lashing out from the pain, but Adrian was different. He sat there with beads of sweat on his forehead, still managing to smile and even crack a few jokes that made me laugh as I cleaned his wounds. I remember his eyes so clearly that night, calm yet mischievous, as if getting hurt was just a minor bump in the road and nothing serious at all. During his follow-up visits, I realized Adrian was more than just a guy with a rugged look and a Harley rumbling outside. He listened to me talk, paid attention to small details like how often I worked overnight shifts, and always made me feel like I mattered more than anything else he had going on. While so many men I'd dated before only saw me as a ticket into the Morgan family's comfort and privilege, Adrian saw me as my own person. He respected the work I did as a nurse, even though my mother dismissed it as nothing more than a middle-class woman's job. That sincerity pulled me in, slowly but irresistibly, into a current I never wanted to escape. I also remember vividly the first evening I brought Adrian home for dinner with my family. My mother, Victoria, prepared the table with even more care than usual, as though this meal was some formal interview to determine my future. The long table was covered with a crisp white cloth, crystal glasses sparkled, and every dish she chose seemed more like a showcase of refinement than something meant to be eaten. Adrian sat across from her, keeping his calm smile, while I felt like I was sitting in the middle of a courtroom. Victoria started her interrogation in a voice that sounded gentle but cut sharp with every word. You plan to open your own tattoo shop. Is that stable enough to provide for a family? Do you have a long-term financial plan? If you have children, how will you save for college? I glanced at Adrian, tense inside, but he didn't flinch. He answered each question, explaining his loyal clients, his dream of expanding his shop, and even remembered to compliment her cooking. My father, Charles, didn't participate directly, but he muttered his usual lines, motorcycles are dangerous. Have you thought about switching to something safer? It wasn't really a question, just his way of adding to the undercurrent of disapproval. And Ethan, he sprawled on the couch with one leg over the other, glued to his phone, smirking. Every time Adrian mentioned expanding his shop or saving money, my brother let out a small laugh, like he was watching a clumsy performance. I sat there trying to appear calm, but deep down I knew the truth. For my mother, that evening wasn't about getting to know Adrian. It was about confirming the conclusion she had already reached. She didn't see him as a flesh and blood man, but as a mistake I had made. No matter how composed or respectful Adrian was, I could see the icy verdict in her eyes, stamped across his forehead like a red mark, not good enough. Adrian chose the most ordinary of moments to do the most important thing in our lives. There was no fancy restaurant, no glowing candles, no crowd of friends cheering us on. Just my small Chicago apartment, the sound of boiling water on the stove, and the faint scent of garlic in the air. He was chopping carrots, telling me about a client at his shop with such a bizarre idea that everyone had been talking about it all day. I laughed, bent down to taste the sauce, and then he suddenly fell silent. When I looked up, Adrian had put the knife down and pulled a small, worn velvet box from his pocket. My heart skipped a beat. When he opened the box, inside wasn't a flashy diamond ring like the ones my mother always insisted were the only standard for a proper proposal. It was a simple band, engraved with two delicate symbols, a curved line to represent me, a sharp angle to represent him, meeting right in the middle. He had designed it himself, every detail in the metal a mark of his own hands. Adrian looked straight into my eyes. There was no showy sparkle there, only a steady certainty that made me feel chosen, cherished. Rachel, he said slowly, his voice deep and warm, I don't have a grand proposal planned, and I don't have fancy words. I only know that every day without you is a day I'm missing half of myself. Will you spend the rest of your life with me? In that moment, all the mocking words, the contempt, the scrutinizing looks from my family vanished. The small apartment felt like it held only the two of us, and everything else became irrelevant. Tears spilled down my cheeks before I could even think about my answer. I nodded so hard that I laughed at my own clumsiness. Yes, Adrian, I will, I said, my voice trembling as though it no longer belonged to me. When he slid the ring onto my finger, it fit as if it had always been meant for me. I felt as though my whole life, the wounds from my mother's harshness, the years of feeling misplaced in my own family, had been soothed by that single, simple act. I had never believed in absolute certainty, but in that moment, I knew this choice was the one thing I had never doubted. When I called my family to share the news of our engagement, I naively thought that at the very least, my mother would restrain herself enough to offer a polite congratulations. But not 10 seconds passed after my words, Adrian and I are engaged, before her voice came sharp and flat with judgment, Rachel, you're destroying your future. Do you even understand that marriage isn't just about love? It's about security. And what can a tattoo artist provide you besides debt and shame? I clenched the phone, my palm slick with sweat. My father, Charles, chimed in, trying to smooth things over but only making it worse. Maybe you should just stay engaged for now. Wait a year or two, and if you still feel certain, then go ahead. Don't rush into it, Rachel. He spoke as though I had just made some reckless, youthful mistake that would fade with time. And Ethan, of course, didn't miss his chance. From the basement, he shouted through the phone, you should date around a little more before settling down. A tattoo guy isn't exactly husband material. His voice carried a smug delight, like he was savoring the moment I was backed into a corner. I stayed silent, letting their words drop like stones into water, rippling cold circles that spread outward. I wanted to scream, to defend Adrian against their contempt, but at the same time I realized the truth: they had made up their minds long before I ever spoke. In their eyes, no matter who Adrian was, he would always be deemed unworthy. And worse than that, they believed my choice of him proved that I wasn't worthy either. When the 2 red lines appeared on the pregnancy test, I sat frozen for a long moment, my heart pounding as if it might break out of my chest. 6 months after our wedding, we hadn't planned on having children, not yet. I worried if I was ready to be a mother, if the night shifts would take too much of a toll, if money and the future would become impossible to manage. But only
So for those who just join us, this is a story about the lady that is a nurse, and one night she received a gentleman who's a tattoo artist, and she's white. The guy is Hispanic, if I remember correctly. So they talk, they hit it off, and they decide to live together, have a family, and whatever. And she brings him to dinner to the family, so the family can meet him and knows about him and so forth and so forth. And the only caveat about the story is that her family is rich, they have money, they're well known in the community, so forth. So the mother doesn't even approve of her being a nurse. She feels like it's too beneath their family status. So the parents didn't like the guy. They didn't like the guy because he's a tattoo artist. There's not much money, according to them. But she decided to go ahead, stay with him, live with him, and now she's pregnant, and she doesn't know what to. Not she doesn't know what to do, but she's in fear of what the family will say, and is she even ready to be a mother? So let's continue.
only seconds later, a warmth spread through me, sweeping away the fear. I was carrying a tiny life inside me, and it was the most miraculous thing I had ever experienced. I told Adrian that evening. He was sitting on the couch, his eyes widening in disbelief. Then he leapt up, wrapping his arms around me so tightly I had to whisper, "Careful, I've got the baby in here." But he couldn't hold it in. He laughed and cried at the same time, pressing his forehead against mine and whispering, "Rachel, we can do this. I promise you'll never be alone, not for a single moment." When I looked into his deep brown eyes brimming with tears, I knew it wasn't just a promise, it was absolute faith. What moved me even more was the way his family embraced the news. When we told them, his mother, Rosa, dropped the spoon she was holding and threw her arms around me, her eyes filling with tears as though she just won the lottery. The very next day she dragged me to a fabric store, eagerly choosing bolts of cloth to sew maternity clothes, all the while telling me about what she craved and feared when she was pregnant with Adrian. His father, Miguel, slipped quietly into the garage and began building a wooden crib with his own hands. I watched him saw each plank, sand down each edge, heard the steady hammering echo through the space, and I knew he was pouring his love into every piece. Adrian's sister, Camila, practically bounced with excitement. She pulled me through baby stores all over the city, arms loaded with bags, laughing nonstop, "You've got to let me be the best aunt ever. I'm covering everything, from socks to blankets." I wasn't used to this feeling, to be loved and cared for without having to prove anything. They didn't care about my background, didn't judge whether I was worthy. They saw me as part of their family, and this baby is joy for everyone. I remember sitting on their couch, my hand gently stroking my belly at just over 8 weeks, tears spilling down my face. I wasn't crying from sadness, but from happiness. It turned out that a real family doesn't need conditions or social standards. Love alone is enough. When I finally gathered the courage to tell my own family, I still held on to the faintest hope that becoming grandparents might soften their prejudice. But as soon as I finished speaking, the room sank into a silence so heavy it was suffocating. My mother, Victoria, set down her wine glass, her brows knitting together, before spitting out words I will never forget. "Do you realize you've just turned your future into a stain? What do you think the club will say when they see the Morgan girl marry a tattoo artist and get pregnant in a matter of months? They'll laugh in our faces." I sat there in shock, my hand instinctively resting on my stomach, while she went on, her voice even, almost transactional, as if she were discussing a business deal instead of a human life. Rachel, you need to seriously reconsider this decision to be a mother. You're still young, you still have time to correct this mistake. Having a child now will bury every opportunity you have. Each word cut like a blade, not just because of its cruelty, but because that was her first reaction to the news of her first grandchild, not joy, not tears of happiness, but a calculation of how it might tarnish her reputation. My father, as usual, hid behind his newspaper, saying nothing, only letting out a few meaningless grunts. Ethan lounged back on the couch, a smirk tugging at his lips as if this entire conversation was some kind of joke. I sat there, my heart tightening, feeling as though I had just lost something I could never get back. Because when my mother told me to reconsider the decision to be a mother, I realized she wasn't just rejecting the baby, she was rejecting me, rejecting the life I had chosen for myself. Even with her cruel words still etched in my memory, I clung to a fragile hope that Christmas might be a chance for things to soften. I told myself that maybe, when she saw my growing belly, when she heard the heartbeat of her grandchild on the ultrasound photo, she wouldn't be able to stay so cold. I spent days preparing the gift, a small silver-wrapped box tied with a red ribbon. Inside, I placed the ultrasound photo and a short handwritten note. I didn't beg, I didn't justify myself. I simply wrote that this was her first grandchild, and if she chose to turn her back, it would be a memory she could never reclaim. When I called to ask if I could come for Christmas breakfast, she hesitated before agreeing. But her voice came through like the edge of a knife. You can come, but Adrian cannot. This is family, and he is not family. I bit my lip until my throat ached. I wanted to scream that Adrian was my husband, the father of this child, the only one who had stood by me when she turned away. But instead, I whispered a single word, okay, and hung up. Deep down I knew, the invitation wasn't born of affection, but of control. And I also knew the gift box wasn't just a Christmas present. It was the last message I would ever leave behind before closing that door forever. The room froze after her words. I sat there, my heart pounding so loud it made my ears ring, yet everything around me was unnervingly silent. My father folded his newspaper slightly, his fingers trembling, but he never lifted his eyes to look at me, as if pretending not to see would erase what had just been said. Ethan slumped further into the sofa, his thumb scrolling across his phone screen, his smirk widening as though my pain amused him. And me, I sat upright, both hands on my stomach, feeling as if a bucket of ice water had been dumped over me, numbing me from the inside out. I had imagined dozens of possible scenarios for that morning. Maybe my mother would sigh, call me reckless, but then quietly wipe away tears at the thought of becoming a grandmother.
Well, her mom wasn't. She's not ready for this. She doesn't even want her to be the mother for this child. This child that she doesn't deem worthy of the family name. This is wild. It's a wild story to listen to. And this is also the situation of, growing up in rich families and wanting to associate with the rest of, I won't say the rest of us, but the people, the usual people, the hardworking class that roam around the world. So now she's pregnant. The mother doesn't want to do anything with the baby. So she sent a note to her mom, but the mom is like, okay. So she wants to say, oh, you know what? Let's come to Christmas, family time. And mom was like, yeah, you can come, but not him. And I'm like, what did you say? So you want me to come to the Christmas dinner and not come my own husband, the father of my child? This is wild. This is very wild.
Maybe my father would set down his paper, force a weak smile, and mutter, at least we'll have a grandchild. Maybe Ethan would sneer, but then awkwardly offer congratulations. But none of those things happened. The only thing I received was a death sentence, cold and final, for both me and the child who hadn't even been born yet. In that moment, the invisible but merciless distance between us became painfully clear. My mother sat at the head of the table, her face utterly unmoved, her eyes like shards of ice, and in them, a flicker of satisfaction, as if she had finally cut away the thorn that had been bothering her. I wanted to stand up and shout at her, to scream that this child was not a stain but a miracle, that I didn't need her approval to become a mother. But my throat locked, every word crumbling in my chest before it could leave my lips. Instead of answering, all I could hear was the pounding of my own heart, each beat reminding me that the baby was still here, alive, present, no matter the curse that had just been hurled at us. I placed my hand on my stomach, stroking gently, as if to reassure both the child and myself. And in that instant, a thought lit up inside me: if my mother could so bluntly erase me, then I could just as bluntly walk away, carrying with me the only thing she could never take, my pride and the baby in my womb. My father still sat in his familiar armchair, the newspaper spread wide enough to nearly cover his entire body. His fingers clenched the edges of the paper, revealing the faintest tremor, but he never lowered it, never once looked at me. That posture was all too familiar. Hiding behind print, he chose silence instead of action. As a child, I used to think his quietness meant calm. But as I grew older, I realized it was simply his way of abandoning responsibility, leaving my mother to steer the family however she pleased. Ethan was different. He didn't bother to pretend. He sprawled across the sofa, phone in hand, the bluish glow of the screen lighting his face. His thumb moved constantly, the soft beeps of his game punctuating the heavy air. Every now and then, he smirked, and I couldn't tell if it was because he'd won a round or because of the twisted scene unfolding in front of him. That indifference cut deeper than mockery. In the moment my whole world was collapsing, my own brother was buried in a tiny screen, as if I didn't even exist in the same room. I looked at my father, then at Ethan, and the feeling of being abandoned hit me hard. Here, I wasn't just rejected by my mother, I was also being left behind by the rest of them, one hiding, the other lost in his own world. The room was full of people, yet I had never felt more alone. I still remember how cold my hand felt as I placed the box on the table, but how steady my voice sounded as I said, "Merry Christmas, Mother." The words came out low, calm, almost too calm, surprising even me. After so many years of enduring, I had finally found the strange strength to leave without shedding a single tear. I turned, walking slowly but firmly toward the door. Each step on the polished wooden floor echoed like another nail sealing shut the door that had already closed between me and this family. The door swung open, and the cold air rushed in, making me shiver, but also filling me with the relief of escaping a suffocating room. I didn't look back. I knew that if I did, I'd see my mother's proud stare, my father hiding behind his paper, my brother glued to his phone. I didn't need any more images to deepen the wound. What I needed was to hold on to the last piece of pride I had, leaving in silence. Hours later, as I sat in my car in the hospital parking lot, Chicago's night settling over me like a heavy curtain, my phone vibrated over and over again. It was Ethan. His voice, when I finally picked up, was panicked, a tone I hardly recognized from him, someone who rarely cared about anything outside his little bubble. "Rachel, what did you do?" "Mom." Mom screamed for over 20 minutes straight. The neighbors thought someone was being murdered. They called the police. She wouldn't stop, just kept shouting, "The baby, the baby." I sat in silence, listening to his ragged breathing on the other end. Inside me rose a strange mix of emotions, pain, coldness, but also a dark flicker of satisfaction. I answered softly, my voice so calm that even Ethan went silent. I only left her what she had already rejected. An ultrasound photo. A grandchild. And the truth that she had thrown it away with her own hands. In that moment, I no longer felt like the little girl trembling under my mother's rage. I was a mother myself now, protecting my child by any means necessary, even if that meant using pain to return pain. I let the silence stretch, the only sound the ragged breathing on the other end. Then Ethan's voice broke through, higher, laced with confusion and fear. "Rachel, what did you do?" "She's really lost it." Mom kept screaming the baby without stopping. The police came knocking, the neighbors gathered in the yard. The whole block thought something terrible had happened. What did you put in that box?" I leaned my head back against the car seat, staring at the ceiling, my hand still resting on my stomach. From within that silence, I spoke each word evenly, cold as stone. I only left her a reminder of what she had thrown away with her own hands. On the other end, Ethan went completely quiet. I could hear him swallow hard, then stammer, "You mean, the ultrasound photo? Rachel, do you know how shocked she is? She refuses to take her medication, refuses to listen to anyone. She just stares at that picture and sobs until she can't breathe. Don't you think that's a little cruel?" A faint smile tugged at my lips, but there was no joy in it. Cruel, Ethan? And what about what she said to me? When she looked me in the eye and called this baby a bastard, when she declared I was dead to her, wasn't that cruel? I only gave her back the truth. The truth that she just pushed away her first grandchild. I heard him sigh heavily, then his voice softened, almost pleading, maybe this has gone too far. If you came back, if you sat down with her, maybe she would calm down. She's still our mother, Rachel. Maybe she just said those things in anger. I closed my eyes, a sharp ache rising in my chest, not because of his words, but because I realized he still didn't understand. I whispered, firm and unshakable, "No, Ethan. She didn't say it in anger. She made her choice, and I've made mine. I will not go crawling back for scraps of approval from someone who openly rejected me and my child. What she's screaming for now isn't love, it's the loss she caused herself. And I have no duty to heal her from that." The line went silent. Only Ethan's broken breathing remained, as if he, too, could feel the door closing between us, just as it had closed between me and my mother only hours before. I was still sitting in the car, the yellow glow of the parking lot lights reflecting off puddles of rain, everything blurred as if my own mind was unraveling. I had turned off my phone, unwilling to hear another call from the house where I had just been erased. When the car door opened, a rush of cold air swept in along with Adrian's familiar scent. He slid into the seat beside me, his breath still visible in the chill, his eyes fixed on me with worry. For a few moments, he only held my hand in silence, letting the heaviness press down between us. Then he spoke, his voice catching, each word sounding like a blade cutting into him. "Rachel, all of this, it's because of me. If it weren't for me, you wouldn't have to go through this. I've taken your family away from you." I turned to him, looking into those deep brown eyes, and I saw it there, guilt so raw it bordered on despair. His hands, the same ones steady enough to etch art into skin, now trembled as they gripped mine. He truly believed his very existence had severed me from the home I'd grown up in. That was the moment I couldn't hold back anymore. Tears spilled hot down my cheeks. I sobbed, the sound breaking in my chest, but still forced out the words, scraping my throat raw. "No, Adrian, you didn't make me lose my family. They abandoned me. They rejected me, and this baby, just because we don't fit into the mold they built. This isn't your fault. All I lost was an illusion, not a real family." He didn't answer right away. Instead, he pulled me into him, holding me so tightly I could hear his heart pounding, fast and uneven, matching my own. I buried my face in his shoulder, crying like a child, my tears soaking into his coat. And there, under the patter of rain on the roof and the bite of freezing air, I realized something simple but undeniable. Family isn't where you're born, or the blood relatives who turn their backs. Family is this embrace, this man trembling as he holds me. From this moment on, family would never again be something I had to beg for. It would be something Adrian and I built together, with a love no one could strip away. In Adrian's arms, in that empty parking lot with the rain drumming on the roof, I finally saw clearly what I had never dared admit. Real family isn't the place you're born into, it's the people who choose to stay when everyone else walks away. My
This is a great way to answer to her mother. She didn't want her, so she's leaving. She's like, "You didn't want me, so I'm out." I'm happy for her that she realized that family is not about where you're born, it's who loves you, right? Because I mean, she has people she loves, people that was around her, but they didn't love her. They just wanted to be one of them have the way they look at things, you know, stay in that rich family mindset of things, which is not always, how a thing works. You know, you don't pick who you love. You just pick, I'll say love picks you, if I can put it that way. So that's an interesting story. Let's begin. Let's end the story. I mean, it's almost over. So we'll see what happened after that.
Mother could reject me, my father could hide, Ethan could shrug me off, but Adrian was still here, holding me as if I were the most precious thing he had. The baby inside me was still here, reminding me that this love didn't need permission or validation from anyone. I understood then that what I had lost wasn't irreplaceable. It was only the illusion that blood equals love. What remained, the truest part, was the man clutching my hand, the one who chose to stay despite the contempt, the curses, the slammed door. And in that moment, I knew with certainty, from now on, I would no longer search for love in places where it doesn't exist. I would build a new family, a family of those who truly choose me. In the months that followed, I lived in a kind of care I had never known before. Adrian's family opened their arms to me as if I had always belonged to them. His mother, Rosa, called me nearly every day, not to pry or dictate, but to ask how I was eating, if I was getting enough rest, or simply to share a few funny little stories that made me laugh. His father, Miguel, spent entire weekends in the garage finishing the oak crib, sanding every corner smooth and carefully applying the protective coat of paint, saying he wanted his first granddaughter to sleep in something strong as a fortress. Adrian's sister, Camila, dragged me out shopping for all sorts of things, from tiny onesies to the smallest socks that made my throat tighten just to look at them. On nights when I was exhausted from nausea, Adrian sat beside the bed, his hand resting gently on my belly, talking to the baby as if she could already hear him. Every time she kicked, his eyes lit up, and in that moment I felt a peace I had never known in my life. I understood then that family wasn't the old house where I had been cast aside, but this little apartment filled with laughter, kind hands, and hearts that truly chose to stay. Then the greatest moment arrived. After a long night in the delivery room, with the steady beeping of monitors and the sharp smell of antiseptic in the air, my daughter let out her first cry. Lily Grace Torres Morgan, 7 pounds 2 ounces, healthy, with a head of black hair and tiny hands reaching out for warmth. When the nurse laid her on my chest, tears burst from me instantly, as if every pain I had ever carried had been washed away. I looked over at Adrian and saw him crying too, his shoulders trembling, his eyes blazing with happiness. In that moment, I knew, no matter what the past had been, my daughter had been born into a true family, one where love never had to be begged for or proven. Adrian held Lily in his arms, and I saw a completely different side of him, not the strong, patient man I knew, but someone shaking like a child, crying with joy as he cradled our daughter. His tears didn't fall in quiet drops, but poured down in a stream, soaking his face. He pressed his cheek against her warm red skin, whispering words no one else could hear but him and the baby. I only saw his lips moving, his shoulders shaking, and I knew they were promises from the heart of a father holding his daughter for the very first time. Those tears weren't of sorrow but of overwhelming release, as if every good thing in his life had just been gathered into this tiny being. I lay in the hospital bed, so weary my eyelids felt heavy as stone, but my eyes couldn't look away from the scene before me. Adrian, the man my family had called unworthy, a stain, someone who would drag me down, was trembling, crying with joy as he held our daughter. That image etched itself deep into my heart, a living testament that every word of contempt my mother had ever thrown at me had been wrong from the start. And as I watched him, I placed my hand over my chest and swore a vow I will carry all my life. My daughter will never have to beg for love. She will never sit in a room lit by cold yellow lights, waiting for a glance of approval from her mother the way I once did. She will never grow up believing that affection is a luxury to be pleaded for. I will not allow it. Lily will grow up in a home where laughter rings louder than reproach, where mistakes are forgiven instead of remembered, where her parents will always be there to hold her rather than turn away. From the very first day, my daughter will know that she is loved unconditionally, that she is the center of a family that chooses to stay, not a family that uses affection as currency or control. In that moment, watching Adrian weep as he held Lily, I understood that every loss, every wound from my old family had led me here. And for me, that was enough. I thought that after the Christmas explosion, my mother would go silent, leaving me to live my own life. But I was wrong. Victoria wasn't about to disappear from my world so easily. She didn't call me directly, that might have felt beneath her. Instead, she went the roundabout way, reaching out to people around me to plant seeds of doubt. First was Sarah, my best friend since nursing school. One morning, as we sat in our usual cafe near the hospital, Sarah looked at me uneasily, then leaned in and whispered, "Your mother called me. She said you're struggling after childbirth, that you're unstable, not fit to care for your baby." I nearly spilled my latte. Unstable? Me? I, who had learned to juggle sleepless nights, hospital shifts, and the demands of new motherhood without once neglecting my child, now branded with that label? I thought that would be the end of it, but a few weeks later my own supervisor at the hospital, Chief Physician Dr. Jennifer Walsh, called me into her office. My heart pounded as I walked in, bracing for bad news. She peered at me over her glasses, her voice even but her expression stern. "Your mother called here. She said you're suffering from postpartum issues, that you might not be fit to return to work or care for your child." Part of me wanted to scream, to hurl every hurt back into the air. Instead, I sat still, clutching the fabric of my scrubs in my fists. Dr. Walsh sighed, leaned back in her chair, and then fixed me with a steady gaze. "Rachel, I've worked with hundreds of mothers. If anyone is steady, if anyone knows how to face hardship, it's you. You've not only done your job well here, but I've seen the way you balance it all while caring for Lily. If your mother truly cared, she should be speaking to you directly, not spreading stories behind your back." Hearing that, my throat tightened. I wanted to cry, from both the sting of my mother's betrayal and the relief that someone had finally stood up for me. I nodded my thanks, then walked out of the office, inhaling deeply. In that moment, I knew my mother's attempt to tear me down had failed. More importantly, I realized something else. I was no longer the weak daughter bowing my head. I was a mother now, and that strength was enough to keep me standing against any lie. As I stepped into the long hospital corridor, I paused and drew another deep breath. The squeak of nurses' shoes and the rattle of carts rolled past me, familiar sounds that anchored me to reality. And in that reality, I understood one thing with perfect clarity: my mother no longer had the right to interfere. The secret phone calls, the whispered rumors, the schemes meant to shake me, all of it was meaningless now. I had come too far to ever go back to being the trembling daughter under her judgment. I was a mother, and all it took was looking into Lily's eyes as her tiny fingers wrapped around mine to know I would never allow anyone, not even Victoria Morgan, to pierce this life with her sharp little needles. I kept walking, feeling lighter, as though I had finally put a period at the end of a long, bitter sentence. I no longer needed to prove to my mother that I was fine. The truth was clear: I wasn't just fine, I was stronger than ever. And in that strength, she had lost the last power she once held over me. One spring afternoon, when Lily was already crawling across the floor, I heard the doorbell ring. I assumed it was a neighbor with a package, but when I opened the door, it was Ethan. He looked thinner, his eyes sunken with dark circles as if he hadn't slept in days. I was holding Lily, and the instant he saw her, the expression on his face, usually locked in a smirk, shifted completely. His eyes lit up, wide and trembling, and he whispered, "God, she's beautiful. She looks exactly like you did when you were little." I stood firm in the doorway, not inviting him in but not closing the door either. Ethan couldn't take his eyes off Lily. His voice broke, as if something inside him was being pulled apart. "Rachel, I have to tell you something. Mom and Dad, they're getting a divorce. Dad says he can't take it anymore. He told Mom she went too far when she cut you off while you were pregnant. They've been fighting constantly since Christmas. He said, a mother just can't do that to her daughter." My heart clenched at his words. Part of me wanted to laugh bitterly. It had taken everything collapsing for my father to finally say one honest sentence about me. But another part of me felt something close to relief. Not because they were breaking apart, but because for the first time in my life, someone in that house admitted my mother was wrong. That what I had endured wasn't just in my head. Ethan stood there, his shoulders hunched as though he was trying to make himself smaller. After confessing, he bit his lip, glancing from me to Lily. She nestled in my arms, her wide eyes innocent, untouched by the lies and ugliness of our world. In that moment, Ethan's gaze trembled, and I realized this was the first time my brother had ever truly faced the consequences of his choices. He took a deep breath, his voice breaking. "Rachel, I know you despise me, and you have every reason to. While you broke your back on night shifts, pinching pennies to support yourself, I wasted away in the basement living off Mom. $60,000. I burned through it on meaningless months. I can't ask you to forgive me, not yet. But when I look at Lily, I know I don't want to keep being that useless person. I want her to remember me as a decent uncle, not as the failure Mom always protected." I stood still, my heart racing, one arm clutching my daughter, the other gripping the edge of the doorframe. Memories rushed through my mind, the times my mother scolded me for loving a poor man, the cutting remarks that I would never have a life worthy of the Morgan name. And all the while, she had secretly funneled money into Ethan, feeding his laziness with dollars disguised as household expenses. All those years I had struggled alone had been nothing more than compensation for the lie they had conspired to maintain. Part of me wanted to slam the door right then and there, to leave Ethan alone with his late-blooming remorse. But another part, seeing his red-rimmed eyes, recognized that maybe, just maybe, this time he understood. I drew a deep breath, my voice steady but charged with emotion. "Ethan, chances don't come from words. If you want to be a good uncle, you'll have to prove it with your actions. But there's one condition that is not negotiable: you are never to take anything, not a photo, not a story, not even a passing word, about me, Adrian, or Lily back to Mom. One betrayal, just once, and it's over forever." He nodded rapidly, tears welling in his eyes. "I understand. I swear. I don't want," and for a fleeting second, I saw a sincerity I had never seen in him before. I studied him for a long moment. There was honesty there, but I also knew trust could not be handed over in an instant. I pulled Lily tighter to my chest, feeling her tiny heart beating fast against me, and in that moment I realized, every decision from now on had to begin with this, protecting my daughter, no matter the cost. I locked eyes with Ethan, giving him no room to look away. Not a single piece of information about me, Adrian, or Lily is to go back to Mom. Not a photo, not a story, not even a fleeting mention. If you betray us even once, this door will close forever. You will lose the chance to be Lily's uncle, permanently. Ethan swallowed hard, his face draining of color. I saw his shoulders tremble under the weight of that condition. But unlike before, he didn't make excuses, didn't argue, he only nodded slowly. "I understand, Rachel. And I'll prove it with actions, not empty promises. I don't want to lose this chance." I kept silent for a few seconds, letting my words settle like a stone sinking to the bottom of a lake. Then I held Lily closer, felt her heartbeat quick and steady, and exhaled deeply. "Good. If you truly want to change, it starts here." In that moment, I saw the new boundary drawn, sharp and indelible. It wasn't just a warning for Ethan, it was also a reminder to myself: never again would I allow the people who once broke me to have the chance to break my daughter. In the months that followed, I watched Ethan with caution, never letting my guard down. But this time, unlike the empty promises of the past, my brother truly began to change. He moved out of the old house and found a sales job at an electronics store downtown. It wasn't glamorous or prestigious, but he kept it, showing up, working steadily. Every time he visited, Ethan would sit cross-legged on the floor, letting Lily crawl all over him, laughing as she tugged at his sleeve or pulled his hair. I saw in him a genuine bond, an effort to finally become part of the family he had once taken for granted. Meanwhile, word of my mother reached me through old acquaintances. After my father moved out, Victoria could no longer maintain the perfect family image she had clung to. Her reckless spending and the secret payments to Ethan came out during the divorce, shattering her reputation that had been the pride of our lineage. For the first time in her life, she no longer sat on the throne she had built for herself. When she tried to reach me and Lily, I handed all the evidence to my lawyer, and the court quickly issued a restraining order. Holding that paper in my hand, craved, the last boundary was drawn. She no longer had the right to step into my life, nor the
Imagine being able to build an app with your name on it, just by thinking about it. Meet Base 44, a complete AI creation platform. Describe what you want and watch it take shape. You can plan, customize, and expand in any direction. From tools built for one to platforms ready for many. From passion projects to enterprise-grade systems. Everything is built in and ready to launch. It's a new world of creation, where you can go as far as your imagination takes you. Can you imagine it? Let's make your dream a reality, right now.
Power to hurt my daughter. Watching Lily giggle in Adrian's arms, while Ethan clumsily stacked blocks with her at his side, I understood that my real family was right here, alive before me. Everything else from the past was nothing but ashes. Lily's first birthday fell on a clear autumn day, the sky a flawless blue. Our little house was decorated simply but warmly, pink and gold balloons floating in the living room, the dining table draped in white cloth, covered with heart-shaped cookies and a small cake topped with a single glowing candle. The guests weren't many, just the ones who had truly stayed, the Torres family with their kind smiles, a few close friends from the hospital, and Ethan, the brother who had disappointed me so many times, now sitting on the floor, gently guiding his niece's hands as though he had always been that kind of uncle.